everyone, and welcome to Embracing Change in Higher Education. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Emily Kennedy, and I am part of the marketing team here at Higher Digital. Before we start today's discussion, I would just like to point out a few things about the Zoom platform and about today's presentation. You'll be able to find the side-by-side mode if you would like to watch the presenters and the presentation at the same time. You'll be able to see this in your viewing options at the top bar of the screen. At the bottom of the screen, you'll find both the chat function and the Q&A function. If you have any issues technical during this time, please use the chat function and I will get them situated as quickly as I can. We would love to take questions throughout the presentation. So as you have presentation questions, please feel free to use the Q&A and we will answer them. If we don't have time to answer them during the presentation, we will answer them following the presentation, and we will also leave time for questions and answers at the end. And with that, I would like to introduce today's two presenters. Wayne Bovier is the co-founder and CEO of Higher Digital. He has spent over 10 years in global higher education. He leverages his expertise in higher education ecosystem to build upon his vision to help institutions dramatically improve their approach to digital transformation initiatives. With over 20 years of experience leading global product teams and organizations that have consistently delivered strong results, he lends his strategic perspective to the development of products and services that are laser focused on solving customers' problems. Joe Gottlieb is the president of Higher Digital. He has spent his entire career helping enterprises to digitally transform, combining a broad view needed to grapple with heterogeneous IT architectures with the specialized perspectives required to address disruptive challenges and opportunities in identity management, security, cloud computing, databases, and networking. He assists Higher Digital customers with strategy development, change management, and strategic operations, energized by the complex challenges and profound opportunities facing higher education. Again, thank you for joining Higher Digital today, and I will turn it over to Wayne and Joe for the discussion.
Thanks, Emily. This is Joe Gottlieb. Welcome, everyone, to our webinar entitled Embracing Change in Higher Education, Strategic Options for Leaders Successfully Leveraging Digital Transformation. We thought this title would be useful and this webinar would be useful so that we could share the things that we're seeing in our work with higher ed institutions as they grapple with a lot of changes and drive successful evolution of their strategies, of their infrastructures, of their organizations, and their cultures. And so with that, let's dive right in. We'll talk a bit about the agenda, and then we'll start sharing some of this material that we've prepared for you today. Wayne and I will be sharing the presentation, going back and forth, offering our different views. First off, we'll talk about all the change that's out there. There's plenty of change to embrace, lots of disruptive forces out there in the marketplace, but we'll want to give you a few different lenses with which to look at those things, while we also identify some of the unhealthy reflexes that are quite predictable and very often happen in organizations when we're subjected to such great change. We'll then spend some time defining digital transformation from a few different angles so that you're better able to recognize its form and to steer it towards the better source of digital transformation that we see working, as opposed to some of the blind alleys that we've seen less successful organizations pursue. Then we'll talk about how we can leverage all of the urgency around the change that's afoot to drive a greater level of alignment in our organizations that can then lead to successful transformation. And you'll find that's going to be a big theme throughout this presentation, looking for that alignment, because that is often the difference maker in between success and failure. And then, of course, we'll spend the bulk of our time providing some practical advice for successful progress that you can apply in your own institution, in your own situation. So with that, let's start with the challenges. We've divided these into external and internal. Wayne, I'd like you to get started with the external challenges that are afoot today.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And before I dive in, I just want to thank again everybody for joining us. It's great to see a lot of familiar faces and a lot of new friends. What we encourage, this seminar or webinar is for you guys. We want to make sure that you guys are walking away with a lot of value and a deeper appreciation and understanding. So in terms of the external challenges that we're seeing, these are all challenges that the industry has faced really in the last, at least the last 5 years. But obviously with COVID, a lot of these have accelerated. We haven't mentioned too much about the clients, the institutions that we're working with, but we are working with some of the leading online leaders. And what we are seeing is there's a lot of investment that they're making. So they are taking an outsized kind of slice of the pie and they're continuing to kind of grow. The value is consistently under pressure. And a lot of this has to do with kind of the financial aspects of this perceived value. With tuition increases and with the attendance online, in person, all of that is really adding to a lot of pressure around the industry. Obviously, the recruiting, getting new prospects in the traditional manner are very tightly aligned and tied to population. And so when you contrast that with what is ultimately happening in the business side, the demand and the supply and demand side, the demand side is asking for a lot of skills, a lot of training. And so there's a variety of different aspects that are really putting the value of the industry in question. The marketing, how you reach out, your traditional local area. Beyond that is usually considered something that is outside of kind of our realm. And so a lot of institutions that we're working with are actually expanding their scope and reach. What we're also seeing around is equal access, right? Driving the cost down, making it more affordable, providing easier access to students of all income populations has also been an elusive goal for the industry. And then the expectations, right? And I would actually argue that it's not just students, right? Certainly parents. I'm personally going through this. I have 4 children. I'm in the middle of kind of my 4 kids. 2 of them have kind of went off. I have another one that's going to be heading out. So I would say the expectations around the digital experience is much more important today than it ever has been. And that is a major challenge that we really don't see really changing much. Joe, do you want to cover the internal?
Yeah. So if that weren't enough, right, you've got these very, very unique sets of challenges and forces operating in the higher ed industry. Internally, we see some of the same challenges that you tend to see in all the different verticals. It doesn't, it's not limited to higher ed, but chief among them is we tend to see unclear business strategy and priorities. And this really is, starting from the very top, really distilling what your strategy and mission and vision are all about and how that translates to prioritized action is very difficult for organizations to formalize and consistently communicate and lead and manage. We also see a lot of budget pressure, and in this case now, in the presence of a lot of need for change, an insufficient budget to actually fund the necessary change. And what we'll talk about is how this really will force us to get very much more clever about how we use the budget that we have and when we need to pull the lever for new budget requests. We know that's hard, but we believe that the level of change that we're talking about here, the opportunity to advance in the market, warrants it under the right circumstances. Of course, lack of organizational alignment is very, very typical, and even to the level of infighting between different parts of the organization. We'll talk about these reflexes that are human nature, but when things get hard, we get stressed. And so alignment can suffer even further when from the stresses. And that adds to the fact that we probably didn't set up perfect organizational alignment with clear business strategy and priorities coming from the top in the beginning. Last but not least, we have cumbersome governance. That's not going to change anytime soon, but setting yourself to navigate your governance for the changes you need to make and equipping those changes within the context of that governance. For example, funding formulas for state systems, very, very typical, right? You really have to think about how your change can be measured via KPIs that are going to drive your funding formula so that you can continue to replenish investment as you make those changes. And then, of course, there's IT portfolio complexity. All institutions have this. We have a set of technologies that are there, some old, some new. We're constantly having to manage that as a portfolio. And we'll talk about the importance of managing technical debt to allow yourself the best possible chances of grappling with your complexity, which is just a part of reality. But this is clearly another one of the challenges on the internal side that we see amongst institutions. So Wayne, how about with all this at hand, then COVID-19 hits. Tell us, has that had an impact?
The elephant in the room, right? So obviously we're all dealing with COVID. I mean, we would all love to be together and doing this in person. However, COVID is something that what we are seeing, and our perception of COVID has really been seen as an accelerator. There's been digital transformation and disruption that has been happening, and there's been a lot of investment in a lot of institutions around the technologies, and those that have actually taken kind of more serious strategic approach to technology are actually faring better because of this. Because what is the weight that COVID has put on the systems, the processes, the staff, so on and so forth. They're faring pretty well. But what we're also seeing is COVID is actually showing where there are cracks. And even those that are actually doing well, the cracks are showing. And so if you are part of an institution that hasn't been investing, that has not been taking technology investments strategically, and we'll talk more in depth about what that means about taking technology strategically, but it is actually starting to put some serious pressure on institutions to kind of overcome.
Yeah, I think, you mentioned the digital acceleration. I think this also has accelerated the need for very robust business processes and really sort of change management processes at the business level. I was listening to a podcast, and I believe it was the University of Kentucky, was talking about how they had set up basically an operations center, a war room for COVID that was merely an extension of the thing that they had set up prior, which was just good preparation. And it really got pushed into good service where they were literally ready to roll out cross-functional work streams. I think there were 30 or so handling all aspects of their COVID-19 response. And so, COVID has exposed lots of things, not just technology, but also business preparedness, which is important to keep in mind. So
Hey, Joe, we lost your audio. Hey.
Leaders, we should all be recognizing how we're going to manage through these reflexes, because they're going to be a natural thing that happens at the individual level, at the group level, and potentially at the organization level. But leadership's job is to make sure that we can work our way through it and continue to drive towards throughout our mission. So a great example is cuts across the board.
Hey, Joe, by the way, just to let you know, we lost your audio for probably 10 to 15 seconds. So I'd say keep going, but we did lose your audio for a little bit.
Okay, I'm back.
You're back? Sounding great.
All right. So did you lose it right when I was beginning this slide?
At the beginning, yep.
Okay, so just to catch up then, all we're talking about here is with all those forces, there's a human nature set of reflexes that can be negative. And the goal of leadership is to really manage through those reflexes. I won't hit all of these, I'll touch on a couple. One, cuts across the board, never a good idea. I can't even think of a single scenario where this makes sense. The reason we're tempted to cut across the board is because it's the fastest to implement. So we're tempted to say, hey, push down to our organizations, make a 10% cut, make a 20% cut. Obviously, the better thing to do is to put forth the energy of adjusting your cuts to fit the strategic choices you're going to make about what to do well together and what to remove from scope or to pause. That's really, really important. Another one is change not being your day job, right? It's really important as leaders, particularly if we want to grasp this opportunity for change and improve our institutions, we have to help our organizations embrace the change work as part of their job. And that often will mean, what do we slow down a little bit? We got to deliver the business. We have to operationally execute, but we have to find a way to make room in our organizational capacity to embrace change. Otherwise, people get very tired, or it's a very temporary push and it cannot be sustained. And last but not least, magical thinking. We can't just push this down on our lieutenants and captains, hopefully, getting a yes response. That's hoping for the best. That's never been a good strategy. So these are some things to watch for as you manage through these stresses as leaders and as you embark on more of your digital transformation.
So Joe,
yeah.
So if I could just add, just want to go back to the previous slide. So you mentioned that this happens with individuals. We're also seeing this in every engagement that we have on organizations, right?
Yeah.
The same list is part of, in many cases, the culture, and it's kind of a natural thing. It is a natural tendency. They are unhealthy, but they are natural. And so, I would just caution and say, let's identify them. Let's, give everybody the benefit of the doubt. But really what is driving this is the stress that the change causes. And that is just kind of an underlying foundational element that the industry is dealing with, your institution is dealing with. And I think by being not only self-aware about how you are dealing with this individually, but how your organization, it could be your department, it could be, if you're head of the institution, it could be your entire institution. I think it's really important to understand kind of where everybody is and look to address a lot of those reflexes directly. Go ahead, Joe.
So true. So moving on, we've got some interesting data points here, which will help. And some of you may have seen this. We pulled this from, the next two slides are both from Inside Higher Ed, a couple of surveys they did. Well, when they surveyed presidents on what they expect their response to be or should be to COVID-19 and the associated recession, 50% said that transforming the institution would be the appropriate response to leverage this period to transform the institution. And 35% said that they should use this period to focus more on what we do best. So reset for growth. I find this to be a little bit surprising, to be honest, but also very, very encouraging, because to me, this is the right leadership response. Because those that shrink or just fixate on returning to normal are going to actually miss a lot of time addressing all the market changes we were talking about earlier. So they're going to be further behind the marketplace if they just hunker down for survival. Now, it's hard to lean into a storm, but we know that, from sailing and other things, that's kind of what you have to do. You have to line up, you've got to point and get yourself headed into that wind to withstand a lot of the pressure and turbulence. And so to me, this is a great indication that leadership is thinking in this direction. But now the key is for them to facilitate their organization in the same direction. Now, thankfully, another survey popped up, and this was amongst business officers. And again, maybe even more surprised, but also very encouraging, 47% of business officers also expect transformation as the appropriate response. And you'll see there a little bit less reset for growth. Maybe that's predictable amongst CFOs. But still, collectively, those two options that are being selected here by these two very important role players in the organization of an institution, very, very promising in terms of a platform for change.
So Joe, if you don't mind, one of the things I'd like to just quickly highlight on these two slides, and you don't need to go back, but I find it absolutely fascinating that 85% of the presidents are actually acknowledging that they have to change, they have to reset. And to me, that's a great indication. That is certainly, there's, to some degree at a board level, there's acknowledgement of this. Presidents are fully understanding, regardless of whether they're, they've been long tenured presidents or whether they're new into the job. There's a real recognition from them that that things are changing, and then we have to, our centuries old structure and all of this stuff, that there's a lot of value here, but we gotta change. When you look at and compare it to the business officers, The piece that I find fascinating here, so you got 85% of the president saying, yep. The other side is essentially the return to normal to shrink. You have, basically the difference between the presidents in that area is 14 to 32%. So essentially you have the leaders understanding we got to change, but you have the business officers from the financials, from that perspective that they're, I wouldn't say they're realists, but they're certainly grounded in a lot of kind of barriers, right? That there's a traditional, like, well, we can't change, we can't, right? It requires a little bit of creative thinking in many ways. And so what I also take away from this, the key thing is, and we are seeing this in all of the engagements that we're doing, is there's a real tension. There's a real tension between those that know they need to, the institution needs to change, and then how are we going to do it? We've never done it. It's something not normal. We can't afford it. All of these reasons of why we can't change. And so, again, we're seeing that dynamic play out of every institution of every size, whether they're an advanced digital one or really feeling like they're behind the curve. There's that kind of play in these institutions that I think is also something really important to be aware of, that you're not alone if you feel that.
Yeah, and we only picked 2 charts. I know there's a whole other set of things that we could be talking about here, but we're going to move on. But I think we'll come back to you with some more thoughts on more of this data that we're seeing in the market. For example, where does the faculty come out in all this? We'll talk about that a little bit later. So let's talk about defining digital transformation. What the heck is this term, right? This is a bit of a word cloud. You can see there's lots of different labels. This can be part of the challenge, to be honest. There's a lot of things, a lot of associations. There's a lot of intimidation that all these terms and all this potential change can generate in people's minds. And so one of the challenges is to sort of navigate that, right? And to really be clear about what you're doing. But Wayne, I know you've got some thoughts on this as well. So help us manage this definition a little bit.
Yeah, and yeah, thanks, Joe. And so, digital transformation, what we're finding is it is such a scary term because of all these words. Am I like, oh my God, it's everything. And so what is core a part of higher digital in our approach is the word simplifying, right? So we like to break things down into simple steps that you can accomplish. There are lots of pieces, right? And I'll pick on an example. If you're doing an ERP replacement, that is digital transformation. If you're upgrading your email, that is part of digital transformation. And we'll talk more in depth about that. But simply put, it is about embracing change and really kind of learning, right, as an organization. We'll come back to this, but it is with technology being a core competency and something that is enabling change, that we're reinventing and reimagining how we do internal processes. How do we teach students, right? So it really runs the gamut across the board, both internally and externally for institutions.
Thanks, Wayne. Another definition came out from Educause recently. This was in June. And, I like a lot of aspects of this because at the very end, Educause is a big audience, right? So a lot of people tune into what they have to say. They did get this right in terms of the level of culture, workforce, and technology shifts that ought to be coordinated to really be worthy of digital transformation. So I think that does a nice job of defining the spirit of digital transformation. And they also called out some items here that are perhaps precursors to things of this depth, of this holistic import, digitization and digitalization. And I find these terms can be useful when you start to think about some of your technical debt. So if you've got systems, if you're all ready to change holistically with big culture shifts and workforce shifts, and you're ready to adjust some technology, that's great. But you might find that you've got some systems that are operating at a lower level that maybe aren't yet digitized or are only basically digitized and aren't yet incorporated into automated processes. And so that's a couple of things that we like about this chart. Wayne, I know you have another view you'd like to add on as well.
Yeah, so I'd like to, if I can, take a little critical eye to this. Thank you for Educause. I applaud them stepping wholeheartedly into this concept around digital transformation. They recognize the importance of it, and so it's great to see kind of their concepts laid out here. But the one thing that I think is absolutely imperative that stands out to me that is. I would absolutely modify, and is certainly a part of Higher Digital's approach, is the way they have this set up is number 5 is like the endpoint. Like we've now have transformed the institution, and that is absolutely not true. I would absolutely argue that 1, 2, 3, 4, and those steps are part of transforming your institution. So the concept of, the stages of digitization and digitalization, I'm fine with, but it is under the umbrella of digital transformation, where there are holistic pieces that are part of it, right? And so the other piece of this is, I want to go back to something I said at the beginning, which is there's no endpoint with digital transformation. It's ongoing. It's a cycle, right? And something that, has got a multiple set of work streams. And so that is, again, I applaud Educause for this, but I think it, if you take a holistic view that all of these things that, you're digitizing information, organizing, that is part of digital transformation, that is a healthier view of what DX is.
A glaring example to build on your point, Wayne, would be like, let's say you have to digitize a set of documents to support a process to change from analog to, to analog or physical to a digital form. Let's say you need to do that, but you're actually doing it in the context of a strategic imperative. That's part of how you are coordinating culture, workforce, and technology. It is driven by your strategy. It is involving cross-functional teams. There's an example where you'll pick up that technical dead item, you'll lift it into this greater context, you'll take something that's bite-sized and get it done, but it's part of a more holistic effort. And so I agree with Wayne. All these things are active in a continuous process, which we'll talk a bit more about. Let's talk about the physics of digital transformation. We thought this would be helpful for people. If you look on the left there, if you know anything about physics or you've played around with levers, you know that this effort on the left is going to be really difficult. That's why the hand is so big. Digital transformation, owned and pushed by IT, is going to be a really hard lift for multiple reasons. We know, politically it can be very challenging, but most importantly, IT is, they're not vested in the complete strategic change and leadership of the organization. At best, they're a member of the executive team. Not always true, right? So, and IT, we got this relationship with the business. Now, some institutions have a really healthy relationship, others have a not so healthy relationship, and there's lots of things in between. The point is when transformation is not about technology, it's about business change, strategic business change in an increasingly digital world. That's what, to us, forms digital transformation. It's got to be owned and driven by leadership if you want to have leverage and likelihood for success.
And Joe, if I can also I want to illustrate this by pulling on a real world example. Actually comes from one of our client institutions. Won't name names, but the migration, they decided it was run by IT to migrate from a Google platform to Microsoft Office 365. It was an IT-led project, and it was viewed as we just need to swap out systems, and there was minimal communication around this with students and faculty and staff, that there was an awareness that we were doing this, but it was minimal. Needless to say, it did not go well. There was a lot of user experience challenges, getting full emails, having access to old emails. All of this stuff caused a lot of problems. However, when you compare that to something, if they would have done it by leadership, here's an example. This wasn't we got to upgrade our Office 365, platform. If it was owned by leadership, they could have said, hey, we are upgrading our communication platform. And as part of upgrading our communication platform, we're tactically going to migrate from Gmail or whatever it was to Office 365. And here's some of the benefits. And we're driving this from a business perspective. Well, that sets a different tone. That sets a different set of priorities and decision-making trees. It also establishes a clear line of kind of communication. So that is a real-world example that we see all the time in institutions having to migrate to a, let's say, Office 365 platform. And this is really the difference between the two styles, and how impactful the leadership, when leadership truly owns the digital transformation versus having it just be an IT thing.
So true. So that sets us up for this one. Wayne, tell us about digital transformation as a continuous life cycle.
Yeah, so this there's two major parts to this slide. And I'll talk about kind of the cycle, but when you think about how do you manage digital transformation, like we've kind of have a clearer sense. We should have a more clear sense after this slide. But when you think about how do you manage something that big, right? Well, we break it down, again, simplifying it. There are really kind of 4 steps the way we see this in terms of an absolute life cycle. Is first, you got to understand, where are we? Right? Again, using that Office 365 example is, okay, what is working? What is not working with our current platform, our email capability, communications, right? How far along are we? Right? And then think about, okay, what are our goals, right? We need to start to strategize. Like, where do we want to go? Where do we need to be, right? Do we need to really own this? Can we offshore this? Or, can we outsource it to somebody? Right? Once we identify exactly what that is and create a plan, then we actually start taking some initiatives, right? We actually start to take the action to actually change, right? And one of the key pieces that we see missing from traditional consulting engagements is that, okay, now you got the assessment and you got the plan handed to you, you started to implement it, but then what? Right? In a lot of cases, you've probably taken a handful, maybe half of the recommendations. You've started to execute them into some fashion. Great. Well, how do you know you're doing well? How do you measure the success of that? And so the other key piece, the 4th piece, is something that we'll be talking more about in the months and years to come. But this idea of being able to take these plans, break it down, simplify it, and then being able to measure the actions that you take based upon your own set of data. So that is kind of the life cycle around it. Inside it is how we actually talk about digital transformation as a 3-legged stool. Joe, do you want to cover that?
Sure. I mean, when you break it down, right, you see some very familiar things here. Organization is all about the structure of your organization, how you communicate things. It includes your strategy, right? So that has to be a really, really important, and it's the driver for, as you can see in the life cycle, the driver for change. Operations is something that you have to keep rolling along, right? So think of operations as the stuff that we understand very well, and we change when we know we're ready to commit something to an ongoing operation. But the stuff that precedes our comfort level is more of the strategic change management work that we're working in. Just like if you're building a software product or if you're building a new course, right? Until you launch it into delivery to students, you're in more of the planning and preparation development phase. And so operations is all about running and executing, right? And being evolved over time via strategic change as we go. Technology, of course, is the underpinning for all this. Technology has to play a role, but it should serve what's being driven by the strategy and what we're committing into operations. So what are we moving into operational delivery in an increasingly digital world? How does technology enable that? And what we like to stress is culture is the seat of the stool. You will struggle with all this if the culture isn't working in your organization. And you can look at culture broadly speaking, or your organization as a whole. You could look at it by group. You could look at it in terms of how you interoperate well or poorly between groups. You can look at it across these lines of technology, operations, and leadership, organization, and strategy. The fact is, dialing this in and getting it right through your structure in a continuous life cycle, utilizing cross-functional teams, is the key to operating. And so it's not the subject for today, but when we help our customers grapple with this and adopt this life cycle of change, we're literally helping them to adopt, and we train and adopt this kind of process so that this life cycle can be embraced across all these parts of the organization amongst the cross-functional teams.
Yeah. And to be successful, right, is that you have to look at the entire stool. So building on that Office 365 example, with it being IT led and it being a technology thing, it was only one leg of the stool. It was, really didn't include operations and the organization and the culture, right? And so a key aspect is understanding that whatever initiative, it could be a new ERP replacement, right? Is really understanding that this isn't just technology. We're talking about human process, the human aspect, workflows, all of these types, how we're going to coordinate with, with old data, what are we going to do? All of this kind of stuff is all part of this stool.
Excellent. All right, from here, we want to move into the section on success factors. So Wayne, let's start to hit these. We got 6 of them. So share with our audience the success factors that you've seen working in practice.
Yeah, and these are 6. They're certainly not the only 6. There's probably many more. In fact, I know there are many more, but this was kind of top of mind for us as we're in early August. The first is take ownership. And the answer is yes, you. If you have asked the question like who, me, yes. I don't care. I know who the attendees in many cases come from all different types of backgrounds. We have a lot of IT folks, CIOs. We have provosts. We have business officers, right? So those that are attending this webinar, really all of you need to take ownership. And what I mean by that is not for you to go in and push the CIO to the side and say, I know exactly what we need to do. That's not ownership. Ownership is over your particular area, understanding how important all the technical aspects are. When you think about asking for customizations, understanding what the impact of what you're asking for. And we'll talk, we mentioned technical debt, right? So there's aspects around your department or what you own, right? Faculty, same thing. Take ownership of how technology is either in the way of your life or improving your life. And also take a ownership over, in addition to your domain, but take responsibility for the broader participation across your entire institution. You play a role, you're not the only role. You can't be an over-demanding client saying, I need all this technology just for your department. You have to take a more holistic view and understand kind of the role that your department plays within the entire technical ecosystem. The second one is make technology a core competency. Time and time again, I mean, Joe mentioned it, I can't tell you, probably, 50% of the time what we're seeing is the CIOs, the head of technology, doesn't even have a seat at the President's Council. There's usually a direct report into the CFO in many cases, potentially the provost. But in this case, that is seen in almost all cases as a cost center. So, IT needs to be integrated with all considerations of kind of what the institution is doing, and because at the end of the day, the core value, the competency of an institution is teaching. Right? You guys have knowledge that we need to make accessible, reach out more students. And that is really the technology is the method to being able to accomplish that, to be able to lower the cost, to improve better access. And we know technology is going to continue to innovate. So technology is going to continue to make things much more immersive. So it has to be completely integrated with everything that you do. It needs to be a fabric of your institution and not just viewed as a cost center. Third is invest. And you can build the rest of these bullets out, Joe. It's easy for me, right, to say to you all, well, you got to spend more money. But that's really, that is not just money. It is also your time. Again, going back to ownership, sometimes you're like, I don't need to go to that meeting. It's an IT meeting. It's not really related to me or whatever. That is part of what you need to reconsider. It is also investing your time, your staff's time. that some of these meetings are important. And if they're a waste of time, make those meetings important. But also, in today's world, I learned this early on in kind of my business life, in my career. Somebody told me you can't cut your way to growth, right? And yes, we're all seeing a lot of budget constraints and challenges around this, but your leadership needs to find a way to fix some of these things because the time is running out. And that the demands for all, the expectations and demands and all this kind of stuff, this is kind of an almost emergency fund type of situation where it's not just throwing money at it, be smart about it, but you can't cut your way to having if the cracks are already showing in your technology infrastructure, cutting your way there will only exacerbate the challenge. The other part is, the fourth piece is focus on rapid alignment. And this really gets to the heart of organization. Higher education is a very siloed industry. Within institutions, you got deans, you got the business officers all having kind of their own budgets, having direct line of sight into IT, really not coordinating. And so what we are finding is, and if I can use kind of analogy that, that ultimately, institutions need to embrace kind of a new operating system. The system that we've been operating under really is antiquated. That we need to figure out a way to really kind of make things much more seamless. And align leadership with those that are actually executing on the IT side. And so one of the key things that we are actively advocating for, and we're seeing this in a lot of our clients who are investing significantly in this topic, is around this kind of scaled agile framework. We call it simplified enterprise agile. It's a lightweight way to start to organize. It could be even your department. It doesn't need to be institution-wide. But there needs to be a new mechanism and a new process to get things quicker, to make decisions quicker, and to ultimately take actions in a more rapid way. Fifth, don't be afraid. It's interesting because as an industry, we're great at teaching, right? That is, we're all about teaching. But what this is really requiring is for us to develop the muscle and skill set to learn as an organization. I would actually be really critical and say, as an industry, we're terrible at learning. And there's a variety of reasons on that. That's not necessarily individual reasons, but we have to embrace that the new norm going forward is something that is a lot of uncertainty and a lot of unknowns. And so what we have to be good at is creating an environment that is safe, that we can speak up saying, I don't know something, and then collectively circling around that problem and starting to figure out a path forward. And so the institutions that are going to survive are those that are going to really truly embrace this ambiguity and really fight the fear, because fear is a constant presence with any level of change. And then the last piece was embrace learning. I touched on it even on the previous slide, but I can't emphasize this enough, how important it is to learn. Both as you all, in all of your roles, regardless of what that is, really start to take a learning mindset, a growth mindset, where maybe you can do your job better. Maybe there's a way to think through that. Maybe we can be creative in our workflow process. Maybe we can make things more efficient, right? Go after and tackle some of the bottlenecks and challenges of your process, right? Don't make it individual, make it a learning exercise for your department and certainly for your institution, and share what you've learned. But again, the fear in many cases, the culture, right, is an important aspect to be aware of, because if the culture doesn't promote you to speak up saying, I don't know something, or I question whether that's the best thing, right? Now we're back to the culture aspect of making sure that you provide in your departments or your institution a safer environment to be able to speak up, because that is a core aspect of learning. And if you ask any of the faculty members, they're going to tell you the same thing. The more that the students engage, the more that they'll learn.
Yeah, it's funny how it's good. It's allowed for them because they're students, and not allowed for professionals. But it's a good point to underscore. So now I'm going to take us through 7 strategic practices for digital transformation. And like the 6 success factors that Wayne just shared, we could probably think of more, but we wanted to give you some good practical pointers here on 7 items. So first off, at the very, at the outset, this is an opportunity to reimagine our institutions, right? We saw the stuff that's happening in the market. Clearly, the most impressive response is going to be something that is anticipating where the market needs to go. How could education become, once again, really, really compelling, and really taking advantage of the technologies, the consumption scenarios, the way learning is changing, the way students interact socially, the way they do group projects, all these things are possible. So thinking about really creating something net new that's exciting, that if you're going to bother spending money and making some big change happen, right, it's an opportunity to really think through what you can be, to deliver much higher value, more sustainably, dramatically more competitive, more resourceful, etc.
And Joe, if I could just jump in, give everybody a quick example on this. So my alma mater, my undergraduate is Dickinson College, and I've been working with President Ensign and talking with her. And for those that don't know Dickinson, it's been around for about 250 years, maybe a little bit more. And this is literally the first time. It's a 4-year private liberal arts college, and that's the way it's always been. Just recently, because of what's happening with COVID and the recognition by President Ensign of the importance of technology, she's actually starting to implement a master's program. And then she also started to think about, well, with technology, we've always been about a 2,000 FTE institution. And in my conversations with her, we were like, well, why can't Dickinson be 10,000 in the next 5 to 10 years? Right? Think about taking the core capabilities of Dickinson, which is the professors and the rigor around that, and start to expand it out. Again, increase the access. And so that's one of many examples that we're seeing about reimagining the institution.
Yeah, and so then back that up by making that a part of your new vision. And the key to evolving vision and mission is communication. Right. So really, it's making sure that you can establish authentic methods of communicating and harnessing the culture that you have around your institution, so that can not just be compelling in a theoretical sense, the reimagined institution. It becomes compelling in a visceral, immediate sense for those that are involved. We talked about budget, right? So this is a time we believe that it is warranted to tap into budget reserves to invest in strategic change. If you're going to do something this big, right, so it's a market opportunity. It's about timing, right? We all know if you study markets and in other sectors, for example, tough times in markets are when new leaders emerge, right? Because there's time for new entrants. There are the incumbents oftentimes are embattled by some of these challenges, and they may be too big to adjust, and so, regardless of size and type of institution, now is the time to leverage resources that you have to be able to lean in. Own your digital experience is one of my favorites because, frankly, you might remember if you're old like I am, the outsourcing craze where we were outsourcing all of IT. This was, in the 90s, right? This was happening. It was determined that IT wasn't core to our strategy. It was context. Yeah, we all need systems, great, this new digital thing, whatever, we'll get communications and networks and all that. Well, what's happening right now, as triggered, you could argue at the most extreme level by the consumerization of IT, mobile phones, social media, etc., is industries are reclaiming their technical stacks, their technology stacks. They're reclaiming their digital experience because they now know that they will have to differentiate who they are by having control over how they operate digitally. Now, this doesn't mean, and one of the last items this year is going to be resist customization. This doesn't mean reclaiming it all as a DIY, all as a do-it-yourself, and or differentiating yourself so deeply that you run into an orphan scenario with your suppliers, even with SaaS, right? Software as a service solutions, which are a great development in terms of our efficiency, ability to get this capability without having all the iron that we have to manage underneath it. Even those, we can go too deep in terms of customizing. So an example would be if you're an Ellucian customer, right? And if you go really deep into some of the process change just to make it fit your process, you're doing two things that are backwards, right? You're keeping your old process. Maybe you need to refresh that process. And oh, by the way, if you go that deep, as they move on and add other features, those features are going to be unavailable, or you're going to have technical debt problems in the architecture. So own the digital experience, but be mindful of going too deep with customization. Another one we love is partner with faculty, right? Institutions are about faculty. I think a lot of the tension in higher ed organizations is about, helping faculty to evolve. We can't just say, figure it out, digitize your course. They're not experts in digitizing courses. However, some of them might be better than others. And so finding who are the leaders amongst them, who can we partner with to make this, to digitize more of our coursework, to think about new interaction models, new student engagement experiences and scenarios. How might we utilize new software that's available that does that at a deeper, more advanced and automated level? But partnering with faculty as a way to cut through some of the organizational tension, we think is a really, really good strategic practice. We mentioned a little bit about technical debt. So if this is new to you, it's something you should learn more about. You should know where you are in terms of your technology portfolio. Because guess what? If you're not in technology today, if you're in technology, you know most of this stuff, right? Some of the stuff that we've been talking about in terms of these types of terms. But if you're on the business side, if you're in a leadership role, what are the functions, or a president or a provost or CEO, right? Getting more aware of how you're going to manage your technology debt will allow you to be a much more successful leader of your institution and participant in the new market, the new economic reality, right? Because that's what students are going to be asking for. So understanding where am I with my architecture, how can I eradicate technical debt by making investments that pay off in multiple ways. That's what architecture is all about. And so if I customize everything, I've got tons of technical debt, I can't move. If I layer things wisely and I understand how I can eradicate technical debt for better flexibility, then I'm in much better shape. And I already mentioned avoid customization as a way of saying embrace standard technology wherever you can. All right, what's happening next? Wayne, let's talk about some likely futures, and then maybe we'll take a little bit of time to take a question.
Yeah, so why don't we go ahead and build this slide?
Okay.
And Emily, why don't you start collecting the questions? We have about 5 minutes left, and I can kind of quickly go through this, and then if you want to, ask any questions. So for those attendees, please. Text Emily any questions that you might have. So looking into the future, we're not going back to normal. There is going to be a new normal. Yes, we are going to get back to class, the in-person, but there is seriously rewiring that is happening. And there's a lot of institutions that are awakening to the fact that they can deliver and have a broader impact post-COVID with the technology and investments. And so there is, so there's going to be a broader, again, this is about access, right? Getting more students access to institutions. Location. I will tell you as CEO of Higher Digital, it really becomes less important to me. I used to be somebody that I believed office and office communications and all that kind of stuff is absolutely critical. I will tell you now I've changed my mind. Location. We've hired people all over the place. And so that applies to degrees as well. We're seeing it. That's going to be, I believe that's going to accelerate. Learning institutions are going to prevail. Really simply put, it is, change is about learning and putting in an infrastructure and a process and making sure your culture embraces kind of the learning. New roles, processes, organizational changes. We are helping institutions in a couple of instances. We've advocated and they've pursued based upon our input that they created a new role, chief digital officer or chief online officer, whose job is really to kind of bridge between the business and academic side and those on the IT who are executing. It's really, owning the digital strategy, being a centralizing team around that. This idea about frictionless transfers and degree management, that's new frontier. We're on the cutting edge of some of the leading institutions around some ideas that they're doing. And there's some common threads about making it easy. Put it another way, this is about the consumerization of education. I want to be able to take my degree and my courses and the credits that I have and move it around. Obviously, it'll never, the regulations around that, the government regulations need to catch up, but there's real momentum that we're seeing in that particular area. And then the last point here is aligned systems and consortiums are going to play a bigger role. In the past, they were typically buying agents, getting you guys all the best deals. Whether, again, it was a consortium that your institution is part of, or if you're part of a system like California Community College system or whatever, they're going to be much more strategic in starting, in particular, enabling the bullet above that, which is around degrees, enabling students to move, to have lifelong learning. All of these types of things are going to be enabled by technology. So with that, Emily, we're almost at time, but any questions?
Yep, we have time for one question. We have a good question here. It says, should I think about digital transformation as an institutional-wide effort, or should I apply it to my large committed projects like expanding my online offerings and upgrading my SIS?
That's a great question. And and we've been going around on that. That's absolutely fantastic. So it's a little bit of think about digital transformation almost as a little bit of a Trojan horse is the way we are seeing this, right? Is use these small engagements and perfect it, get it down, because you have willing participants, right? ERP implementation, we're doing this, we're doing a full transformation, organizational transformation alignment, in addition to an ERP replacement at the same time, because it makes sense. The participants involved are engaged. They understand it. They're willing to learn. They understand that these types of deployments are fraught with risk, and so this is the time to do it. Our experience has been when you try to do anything big bang, like we're going to do it all across everything, it will fail. It is high probability that it will fail, and so we work with institutions of all degrees, big, small, who are using these projects and starting to use them as a case study, because in a lot of cases, what ends up happening is you got other departments saying, hey, that project is going really well. Everybody seems to be happy. There's a lot more transparency. My voice is actually being listened to, all of these types of things. Then all of a sudden, kind of peer pressure kind of goes in, it kicks into gear, where all of a sudden people want to jump on board and participate in it. So you get one successful project under your belt around digital transformation, you then will likely start to gather others.
Well, that's a great question. And we want to be respectful of everyone's time. We're at time now, so we're going to close. In terms of what's next, if you'd like to learn more, please do visit us at www.hire.digital, or you can email us at info@hire.digital. We really thank you all for joining us today. We will be following up with a link to the recorded session so that you can refer to it at your leisure. And once again, thanks for joining us. We'll look forward to seeing you on future webinars, and please enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.